Today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners, who for more than 25 years have successfully delivered interim and permanent leadership talent to transform businesses. To hire the talent you need to enable your business to thrive, visit www.progressotalent.com today. Welcome to Extrology, the podcast where we delve into the minds of those who shape our world through innovation, leadership, and an unyielding pursuit of excellence. Today, we have the privilege of welcoming Gerald J. Leonard, a maestro of productivity and cultural transformation. Gerald stands at the forefront of the Leonard Productivity Intelligence Institute, where he dedicates his expertise to elevating workplace environments and refining the productivity paradigms. As the CEO of Turnberry Premier and a renowned project portfolio management and IT governance virtuoso, his blend of musical talent and business acumen orchestrates a unique symphony of productivity and leadership insights. An author, TEDx speaker, and a bass player with a flair for harmonizing teams like a jazz ensemble, Gerald brings a fresh perspective to the art of achieving more. Having graced platforms like NPR and Jack Canfield's show, he's here to share the rhythms that drive success and the melodies of effective leadership. So what's the story behind the story? Without further ado, let's get into it. Gerald J. Leonard, welcome to Extrology. It's great to have you here as our guest today. Thank you for your time and your energy and your input. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So much I want to enjoy. But first things first, welcome. It's great to have you on the show.
I'm really glad to be here, and thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. And joining us from Atlanta today, would that be correct?
No,
the US?
I am from Spanish Fort, Alabama. I am near the Gulf of Mexico, between Mobile and Pensacola. And it's a beautiful area. The great people here are great, and it's a great scenery and a great place to live. So, that's where I'm coming from.
Well, even when you utter the phrase Gulf of Mexico, it encompasses this kind of richness of warmth and just heat and the good stuff, right? So which being a resident of the good old UK, it's a slightly less familiar feeling for us. But I won't dwell on the UK weather. That's a very British thing to do. So without further ado, I've so much I want to ask of you, but not least you of a fascinating approach to productivity. I think comparing the managing of a team to conducting a jazz ensemble, I think, is a really fascinating and in my experience, rare way of looking at this. So I'm interested if we might start perhaps on asking you to elaborate on how you see those worlds intersecting and perhaps the lessons that leaders can take from the world of music.
Sure. And I'll just say a little bit of how I got into this world. I did my bachelor's and master's in music. I did about 6 years or so after I did my bachelor's and master's in music working in the New York area, but I actually did some ministry work for a period of time. And I decided I really wanted to get back into music. But at that time, I had a family, I had a young family, little kids. And growing up in Lakeland, Florida, my dad was always there for me. I can literally see him now getting up and going to work and coming home and just being in my life. So as a musician, I could not see myself putting my career in front of my family or my kids and going on the road and them saying, yeah, that's my dad who's on stage, but I don't really know him. And so that wasn't going to happen. So that became, that was one of my core values was my kids and family. And so to supplement my income as a musician, I got into IT, and I always tell people I got into IT, technology, information technology at a time when if you could spell IT, they would let you in.
I think there's more to it than that, but I'll let you go on that one.
And so, and I love to read, right? I'm a big reader. And so I just started reading everything I could about technology. And what was interesting was picking up the computer and getting into technology was a lot like picking up an instrument. And what I discovered was on the weekends and certain nights, I'd have jazz gigs or I'd have a concert and I'm performing. And then I'm doing my consulting. And then I became a consultant. So sometimes I'm working from home. Sometimes I'm at the client site. And we would go in teams. And I started noticing that our teams, when we had really productive projects where the client was happy, the teams were working together, and I'd leave there and go to do a concert or a jazz gig or do something in music. And there was this aha moment that was like, this is a lot like the same kind of thing that's going on. One, we're playing music, but the other one, we're doing this business, but it's the same feel. And I started analyzing, like, well, what's going on? And as a musician, everyone who's a musician, you're going to woodshed, you're going to practice. Even today, I've been playing for 50 years. I still practice. I still pick up my instrument and work on scales and still work on my technique and still practice my craft and try to figure out what other musicians are doing to get better. I still listen to other musicians if I'm working with someone. We're looking at the big picture, and there's all these things that you're doing. I also have coaches and mentors in music. They may not be right on my instrument like they used to be, but they may be like a music producer who can help me shape the music that I'm creating and kind of guide me into parts of the music business that I'm not as familiar with, right? Well, in the business world, what I realized in those particular projects is that the team members, they studied, they were mindful, they wanted to get better at their craft, whether they're a developer or an analyst or a designer or a QA person. They went to associations, they went to networking meetings, they talk shop, so they were always getting better. So that's kind of like their woodshedding, they're practicing. When we came together as a team, because everyone is really good at what they're doing, and we had the big picture, we had a charter. In the business world, it's called a charter, right? And that charter says, here's what the project is about. This is what success looks like. Here's when it should end, and so on and so forth, and the team members and stakeholders. Well, everybody knew that. So now we have the score for the project, and everyone's looking and going, okay, how do we work together, right? So everyone's leaning in and listening and figuring out, what part do I play? How do I support you? And so on. And then the other big picture was we made sure that the audience, whether it's the stakeholder who's in front of us in the room, right, sitting there in the room, or whether it's a stakeholder who's an end user who may be in another country, or maybe they're in another part of the state, or maybe they're in another building, but they're going to be impacted by what we do. We have to consider everyone, just like when musicians are playing music, you go on stage and you have people in the front row, right? They're kind of like the people in the audience and people who are at the table with you. But if you're in a big stadium or if you're in a big auditorium, you also have people in the back of the audience. And you want to make sure they're included. So I started looking at project management and business the way I would do music, right? Make sure everyone's working on their craft. We're all leaning in and listening together. We're all paying attention. We're all supporting each other. But when it came to the audience, the people who were out in the field that we didn't see were now just as important as the people that we did see. And because of that, a lot of the projects were really, really successful because we made sure that we included all of the stakeholders. We made sure we got everyone's input some way, some form or fashion in the project, not just the people who are sitting at the table. That would be like playing a concert and you only turn the sound up enough that the people in the front row can hear it, but nobody in the back can hear it, right? And I mean, if you do that, people are going to leave your concert. They're not going to stay. If you don't have big screens up where people can see who's on stage, they're going to leave. So you have to make it where even in the business world, you're thinking like an artist. You're thinking like a band. You're thinking like musicians, not only about the people who are in front of you, but also the people who are not in front of you, but who are going to be impacted and influenced by what you're doing.
I think there's a really interesting perspective you offer up there. I'm struck as we're talking, or as you're talking, as to, oftentimes we'll hear as to the parallels between business and sport, for example. So we start looking at the implications around teamwork and all of that would impart on the sports field, in the office, or wherever it may be. But actually the thing that then strikes me is what that bit doesn't include are the spectators. To your point, it doesn't work unless the musicians are engaged with the audience are engaged with the musicians. There's a sense of the wholeness of it.
Exactly. And it can't be part of the audience. It has to be the whole audience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. That's kind of really interesting. They created something called the Sphere out in Las Vegas, this huge ball.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've never been. It looks incredible.
I've never been inside, but I've been out in Las Vegas and I saw the outside of it. It looks amazing. And it's all, screens and so on. It's really crazy how they put that together. But what was interesting is that seeing videos about it on the inside is that there's no bad seat. Like every seat, the way they have it structured, it's almost like you're in the front row or you're very close towards the audience or towards the musician, so you really get to see them. But it takes in that consideration as we're talking about the importance of the audience and the different stakeholders that are part of the process.
Do you think that's and apologies for my clumsy questioning, but it just strikes me as to the impact that has on productivity and on project management, that perhaps historically, and this is where the clumsiness comes in, but that perhaps historically the focus was on, right, so we're the project team, this is what we're looking to deliver. We've got, these are the sort of stakeholders just around the edges here. These are the ones we're looking to satisfy. That's all we've got to impart. Actually, what you're encouraging is let's look at the wider picture, the big picture as to the audience of stakeholders, if you like, the ones that we can't see, the ones in the back row. We've got to get to them and understand what is it that they want out of this project? What is it that we're trying to achieve for them? So we're actually basing our decision-making process and our actions around the trying to influence the right outcomes for all stakeholders rather than just those that are sat in the front row.
Exactly. And I say that with the idea that an experience. One of my clients who brought me in, and I'm still on retainer with them and I still provide them consulting support, brought me in 2014 because they had a really large, complex project that they wanted to manage. And what I discovered after being there was that they had previously brought in another firm to do this work. And I happened to know the firm, the name of the company, and I knew some of the people in the company. And I know that they're really good at what they do when it comes to the technology that they were going to implement and some of their strategies. Where they fail, because obviously the only reason I'm being brought in is because what they tried to do didn't work. And the reason it didn't work was that it didn't work because it worked for the people in front of them, but it didn't work for the people that they didn't see that were out in the field. And what they discovered was that the people out in the field had a larger voice than the people at the table, because the people at the table purchased the solution and kind of, started working the solution and tried to implement the solution. But if the people out in the field didn't want to go down that route and want that solution, then they would push back, and it made the entire project fail. Even though they're really smart, they had probably a really good solution, but their approach to what they were trying to roll out, and the way they were trying to roll it out did not jive with the folks who were out in the field. And so they put the brakes to it. So when I went in and I heard that story, I made sure that we understood what the overall end user community who were going to be living in this environment from day one. And sometimes it's not just the guy in the corner, right? The senior executive who's driving the big car in the fancy house and so on. It's the administrative assistants, it's the secretary, it's the admins who are having to do a lot of the grunt work, and they're living in that system day in and day out. If that system doesn't make their life easier and support them, they're going to say, I can't do this. This doesn't work for me. If you're going to give them something that's complex and they don't understand. So the model that we had, and I just used this model on this particular project, and it was, hey, we want to make it like an iPhone. We want to have very few instructions. We're not going to have a manual. We're going to have a one sheet, right? So if you take on this system, we're going to hand you a one sheet, and you should find everything on there that you need to know to do your job in this new system. Well, once they got the one sheet and they started the process and they realized they only had 3 things to do in this new system to make it work, they were like, this makes my job easier. So guess what we got? We got embraced. We got accepted, right? We became the biggest fans, because now something that would have taken hours of time on the weekend or just a lot of confusion, now they're done in 3 clicks, and they can now go to their son's ball game, or they can go out to dinner, or they're not having to work on the weekends. And when you do that for a group of people, they look at that and they go, wow, this has made my life so much easier. So it was leveraging technology to enhance productivity, but also you're enhancing the life of the people who are embracing the technology and the change. And that's where the value becomes created. Even more so is when the people who are using the technology and the processes see that you've created value, not just for the company, but for them personally.
I want to, before I do so, I have many questions about your book, your latest book, A Symphony of Choices. We're going to come on to that. But before I do that, I just want to, if I can, for listeners, want to go back a step. So much of what we're going to talk about today is these parallels that we refer to around productivity and music and what can be shared and learned between the two. But the first question that struck me is when first we started talking was why music? Was there a point? Let me ask a different question. What part did music play in your childhood? If you go back to growing up in Florida, I guess I'm interested to understand when you first picked up an instrument and why, and what the journey was from there.
Okay, if you look over my shoulder, if you see a ukulele that's from Hawaii, and then you see a little red guitar with no strings on it, little white. Well, that used to be my sister's, and I was 10 years old. I was learning how to play piano. I didn't really like it that much. But she had this guitar thing, and I would go into her room, or I'll put it this way, I would sneak into her room, and I'd grab it, and I'd go sit in the closet, and I'd start playing it. And she was supposed to take lessons. She'd never practiced. And then pretty soon she caught me one day, and she was like, I don't want this thing anyway. You can have it. And so she kind of let me have it, but she, also gave it to me. And interesting enough, a few years ago, I was visiting her down in Florida, and she goes, come here. She walks into a bedroom in her house, and she goes, you need to take that with you. And I'm like, what is that? She goes, that's the guitar you stole from me when I was a kid. And I left it there because I graduated to these other basses, right? The large upright bass and other instruments. And so in that process, she was basically like, you can have this. And so that was how I got started. And why
was music a big part of your childhood anyway? Was music always around, always on?
It was a big part of my childhood from the standpoint of I loved listening to music. If my parents put music on, I couldn't stand still. It was just like music just physiologically moved me. I couldn't, if I heard music, I was captivated. And so when I learned how to play it, that just pulled me right in as well. And so I practiced and started, and I joined a band with some friends of mine. And then one of them, even though I was 10 at the time, 10, 11, one of them was like 12 years old. He was an amazing guitar player because he had been playing since he was like 6 or something like that. And his family members were musicians. And the guy played almost like Jimi Hendrix. No kidding. I mean, he was really, really good. And so I knew I wasn't going to be the guitar player. And so I switched to playing the bass lines. And bass required you to learn the entire song. You had to learn the structure, and you're playing the supportive role. And to make it fun, you got to really just kind of make it, in the pocket and have fun with it. And what was interesting, at the same time, in Central Florida, it's a city called Lakeland. That's where I grew up. They created, and in 19, I'm giving away my age. They created in 1974. They created the Lakeland Civic Center. Previous to that, if you wanted to go see like the Commodores or Earth, Wind and Fire or any of these major bands, you'd have to go to Tampa or Orlando. Well, I'm a 12-year-old kid, right? That's not going to happen. But now, with the Lakeland Civic Center being there and it being maybe like 3 or 4 miles from my house, right? I could go out and mow some grass and do some yard work, and the tickets weren't that much. And we would get together as a band and we would go buy a ticket and we'd go see these groups.
Who was the first group you saw? Do you mind me asking?
I don't remember. It's been so long ago. I don't remember the first group, but I do remember vividly seeing a group called the Brothers Johnson. And it was a guitar player and a bass player. Let me tell you, when I saw Louis Johnson playing the bass the way he was playing, I had by that time bought my first bass, and I had these headphones, kind of like what you have on, but I could plug them into my bass and practice and like play it all times of night. Parents would never hear me. I think I came home and I probably stayed up to 3 o'clock in the morning, just playing, just trying to imitate what he was doing, because I had never seen anybody play like that. And I was just like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. And so I was just like buzzing with energy. But I mean, imagine being that impressionable and then seeing in living color Earth, Wind and Fire and Vernon White playing bass, seeing the OJs, seeing Jeffrey Osborne and LTD, seeing the Commodores. I mean, just seeing all these amazing bands, Ohio players, just all these amazing bands. And, you hear them on the radio, but now you're seeing them live. You're seeing them use their instruments and what they're playing, which instruments they're playing. I was hooked. And so I would say there's three key lessons, and I kind of alluded to it earlier. The lessons I learned that have transformed my life that I learned as a kid was, one, you got to practice. No matter what skill you're going to go after, you have to practice. You have to embrace the instrument. You have to learn the ins and outs of it. Like how does it work? What's the theory behind it? You have to just embody that instrument. Two, you need a band. You need people around you who are going to be in your band. So whether it was when I got into project management, I joined the Project Management Institute, or I joined something called MPUG, the Microsoft Project User Group, where I would go to meetings with people who had the same interests, and we could talk shop. They became my band, right? And the other thing is you have to have a mentor, right? Because when I was playing as a kid, I got to a point where I could listen to the radio, I could pick up things, I could learn from my friends. And then I got to a level where it was like, okay, my growth stopped, right? I could learn another song off the radio, but now I'm like, okay, so why does that sound work? And what if I do this and that sounds comes up? How does that work? And so I was trying to, I didn't understand the theory. So then I found a teacher. Now, I was the youngest of six. Mom and dad were amazing. My dad poured concrete. He had his own business, was a construction worker, and he had his own business doing that. My mom was a seamstress. And supporting a family of eight, when you want to do a whole lot of extra, you got to go figure it out. And that's kind of what I had to do. And so I learned early on, just like I would go and do work to buy tickets to go see these concerts, I went and started working to make money to go find a teacher, to go pay them to teach me how to get better. That lesson as a kid never left me. That if I wanted to get better at something, I needed to invest in myself by working, paying someone else who knew more than I did, who was much more ahead of the game in that area that I wanted to grow in, spend money, have them teach me, show me what I was doing wrong, what I was doing right, give me the background. So then I began to now start to grow again as a musician. And that's when I got in high school. And next thing I know, I'm in college studying music and, full scholarship all the way through college because of that mindset. And I've used that even as of today, right? I'm 61 years old and I have probably 7 coaches that I pay. I work with Les Brown. I work with Jack Canfield. I'm working with Tony Robbins' team. I have another guy named Dr. Paul Shilley. I mean, there's a few other folks. I have a golf coach, and I've had physical therapists when I have gone through a physical issue that I had to work through. And I realized the value of having people who are way ahead of the game from me that I would pay, that would then help me get caught up and learn the nuances. But practice, have a band, have a coach.
Seamless link, which you've done wonderfully there for me. Thank you, because I wanted to talk about your latest book, A Symphony of Choices, and you explore beautifully, I think, mentorship and decision making through a really captivating narrative. And my question was going to be, what inspired that analogy? I think you've answered some of that to a certain degree, but how do you think it can change the way managers engage with their teams?
Okay, so as I was writing the book, and I worked with a writing coach on this one as well, as I was writing the book, Ted Lasso, right? Ted Lasso. I just want to say the word, get your reaction. That became like a really big show, and me and the writer were talking about it. And I started binging with my wife on Ted Lasso, and as I'm writing the book, I was like, okay, my book needs to have drama, like real life drama situations. And the reason I decided to make it a parable or a fable, a story, was because, one, people learn best, especially when it comes to complex concepts, they learn best through stories. Because if I tell you a story or give you an analogy of something or a fable around something, I can give you a fable or a story around a very complex process. And the nuances of the complexity you will catch more than me just kind of trying to describe it to you. If I try to describe it to you, I'm going to put you to sleep because it's going to be too detailed. Your brain's not going to, and so our brains work in pictures. And the best way we get pictures, and this is why stories last, is that when we hear a story, we get a picture in our mind, right? That's why, even before television, people sat around the campfires and told stories because there are pictures that come in our minds, and that's how our brains work best. And one of the best books I've ever read was a book called The Goal by a gentleman named Elliot Goldratt. He's passed away. His son runs his company, but he wrote a book that was based on the theory of constraint, something I've gotten certified in. And it's a complex process around managing constraints and things like that for supply chain. You can use it in project management and other parts of your business. But he told it as a story of a gentleman who was running a factory where the factory was about being threatened to be shut down. He had challenges in his marriages. He had kids, and he had to go through the process of learning these concepts. And he ends up finding a physicist who was a teacher of his who came back as a consultant and taught him these principles. But you learn the principles through the story of his life. And as he changes his factory, you're sitting there with him learning that. So when I wrote my book, Symphony of Choices, I wrote it from my perspective. I'm a bass player in an orchestra. As a person who's a bass player in an orchestra, and he gets tapped on the shoulders to be the symphony manager. And now he has to turn his concert season around. And so he go, okay, I've been playing for 20 years, but what is this business stuff and things I need to learn? So what does he do? He reaches back to an old professor who sits down with him for coffee and begins to teach him these principles of decision-making and project management and workplace engagement, and takes him through all these different methodologies. And as he's learning them in piecemeal, as a reader, you're sitting there with him going through the story. And so you're visualizing yourself going through that transition. So he learns all this, but at the same time, not only because life doesn't live in a box, right?
No.
I mean, so he's kind of going through things in his career, and the conductor's a prima donna. He has a pretty good boss, but he has all these other challenges. The board doesn't get it because they don't understand musicians and why do they need more money? And, isn't this a hobby for them? And so he has to educate them. But then his spouse doesn't really get what he's doing and doesn't support him. And then the kids are going through their things. He has a teenage daughter and just some challenges there. So you start seeing his life from the holistic perspective. As he's being mentored in one area, he's realizing that some of these same principles I can use in my personal life. And I can use this listening concept, or I can use this prioritization concept, or I can use this decision-making process with my family, not as a business, but as a way of thinking so that I can transform and work things out. I won't tell you the end of the story because that's what the book is for, right? But
yeah, absolutely.
but it really I did it, and so I always tell people the best way to describe the book is it's like Ted Lasso for project, program, portfolio management.
Sounds like a lot of fun. Can you perhaps share with listeners a specific instance that springs to mind, or perhaps choice that you will have made, event that occurred that you feel significantly altered your path to success?
Okay, so one of the critical things that happened to me is I was at a weekend retreat, and it was a great day. I was really excited about it. I jumped into the shower and everything changed. I could not tell up from down. I had this thing that happened to me. I was rushed to the hospital. I was examined for a day and a half. And after the end of it, the doctors came to me and said, Mr. Leonard, you've had a major bout with vertigo. But it's not normal because, like, some people go through vertigo and they're unbalanced for a little bit and they get better. This one wiped out my vestibular system. So I literally lost the ability to walk. Here's the catch. It happened 6 weeks before my TEDx talk. And I am the sole breadwinner for my family, and I'm an independent consultant. So if I don't work, I don't get paid. And if I can't recover, we're in really bad situation. So as I'm laying there in bed, feeling like somebody hit me upside the head with a baseball bat, put me on a big ship in the middle of the ocean, I can't look at television. I can't look at my laptop. I talked to my clients. They were like, we get it. Let us know when you're back on your feet. We want to help you through this process. You've done so much for us. So they were like, okay, you're locked in. Don't worry about anything. And as I'm laying there, I'm thinking about my TEDx talk, which was about what if practice performance, the neuroscience of music, and the impact that music has on the brain. So as soon as I could move my body, I basically got up and I used the walker. I used my hands to hold onto the wall, and I made it to my office. I grabbed one of my basses and I just started playing. And so the first thing I said was, thank God I can still play, because I didn't even know I could still even play or not. I mean, it was just that bad of a condition. And every day I play a little bit of music, and then I would slowly start to walk a little bit. And I noticed that the first time I did it, I noticed I felt different the next day. I just felt different. And I just did it I just played every day. I would just play whatever came to mind every day.
When you say felt different, was that it felt better, different?
Yeah, I felt better, different.
Sense of it.
I felt like a sense of healing coming over me. So what I ended up doing was I felt better, and I realized that, okay, what I had learned theoretically, that now as I'm actually putting it into practice, I'm seeing the impact of playing music on my brain, on my neurology. And that process, although it transformed my life, it didn't transform my life overnight, right? It wasn't like 2 days later, I'm like back to walking. 3 weeks later, I go into my ear, nose, and throat doctor. He was impressed with what was happening to me because I walked in unassisted. Previous to that, I had to use a walker. I could not walk on my own without a walker. Now, I'm very gated and very deliberate in my steps, but I walked in unassisted. Once they did the test, he said, Mr. Leonard, you've lost 86% capability in your right inner ear, which is your brain, that part of your brain that deals with the vestibular system. I had lost, he goes, I don't even know how you hear out of your right ear anymore, but you do. He goes, what have you been doing? I said, I'm preparing to do my TEDx talk because I made a decision and I set a goal that, okay, as I'm laying in bed, I got to have a goal. I can't sit here and do nothing. I can't get depressed. I can't feel sorry for myself. I can't wish this happened on somebody else. It happened to me and I got to deal with it. And so as I'm laying there dealing with this, I made that decision and I'm just making progress. 3 weeks later, I'm on stage in Delaware playing my bass. I wrote a song called Vertigo that I recorded, and I delivered the TEDx talk. I'm still going through, I'm still very much impacted by what's happened to me, but I'm making progress. And so I realized then in fact, my doctor called it a disability. I didn't use those words because one of the things I learned about from a certification I did in neuroscience called conversational intelligence is that our words create the worlds that we see. The words that we use creates our world. So if I would have just kept saying to myself, I have a disability, guess what I will be telling my body?
Yeah.
I'm disabled. So guess what my body subconsciously would start doing? It would start becoming disabled. So what I use is the theory of constraints from the book that I told you I love, that I kind of mimicked my book off of, which was the theory of constraints. I didn't say I had a disability. I would never tell people that. I said I have a constraint. Well, what's a constraint? If you're trying to water your garden and you take a hose and you turn the water on, but you don't have a nozzle on it, the water just kind of flows out. You're using all this water, but you're not really watering the garden, right? But if you go to a store and you get a little nozzle, and what does that nozzle do? It constrains the water, right? And it puts little holes. And so now that builds up this pressure, and now the water's flushing out and spraying everywhere. Now I can water my garden. So constraints are not bad. Right? It's based on something called the Venturi effect in physics. So constraints are not bad. And so here I am now thinking, okay, this is my constraint. So my brain goes, okay, so constraints are not bad. So what can you do with inside of this constraint? There will be days I had to take a nap. There would be days I go, okay, I can get one thing done today. There are days I can get 2 or 3 things done. And that was as much as I could get done. So then I would spend time planning out my day. And as I was going through what they call vestibular therapy, I was working with PhD therapists and doctors who basically taught me body movements that would literally rewire my brain. So I started researching kinesiology. I learned about brain gyms. I learned about the power of yoga. I learned about mindfulness. I learned about meditation. And I started incorporating these things into my life. And even though I could only do one or two things a day, the things I started doing started moving the needle in my life faster than when I had everything working properly.
Would you suggest, was there one specific thing to which you would attribute moved that needle the most? Or do you think it was accumulation of all those? Was there one thing you noticed that that's the really seismic shift, or was it accumulation of all of them?
It was accumulation, but I think the thing that, if I could say there was one thing, it was the mindset, and it was the vocabulary that I use with myself. That even though, because as I went through this, and this kind of gets a little personal, I went through a divorce because it exposed things in my life. So there were things that I had to deal with, that it's like, okay, not only is this going on, but man, this other thing is happening, and then I got this other stuff over here, and this area is going. It's like, okay, I got to put my mask on, and I got to work on me. It's kind of like what they tell you when you get on the plane, right? And in case of emergency, put your mask on first. And I had to step back and go, because at the end of the day, after years of going through this and getting better, working with neurologists and, different doctors, they were like, I believe, based on what you're telling me, that this happened because of stress, because you were taking on everybody's stuff. You're the sole breadwinner. You had stressful situations, and your body just said, I can't do this anymore. And it shut down, right? And so I realized how valuable that mindset was. And so if you look at my life now, it's much, much more successful than what it was before. And I wasn't doing too bad then, but I'm much more relaxed, and I'm much more in a state of abundance and a state of waking up in the morning with a routine of, writing out my goals and doing yoga and meditating and having my quiet time or reading my Bible and prayer. And I've planned out my day, and I know that, okay, I have 3 meetings, and then I'm going to get these 2 things done today. And by being very purposeful and very thoughtful, it's allowed me to accelerate, or my life has accelerated in activities being done or results happening so much more faster than if I was just out there just trying to do it the way I was doing it before.
Do you think that's a really interesting, full of broad sweeping generalizations, but if I look at much of how we, and when I say we, I don't mean you and I, but generally as the kind of, the 7 billion of us on this wonderful planet, but we attribute busyness, doing, right? So we have that sense of, right, to succeed, people talk it all the time, the hustle, whatever you want to describe it, right? So it's like, do lots of stuff, be really, 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 really busy, and that's how you win. What means different things to different people, whether that's materially, financially, whatever. You burn out, right? So actually, if there's one thing, there's no point in getting older without trying to get just a tiny, teeny bit wiser. But if there's one thing what's fascinated me is I hustled and hustled and hustled like hell through my 20s and 30s and much of my 40s too. It's kind of, I'm achieving way more in my 50s, but I've slowed down, but I'm achieving far more. And I think it's a really interesting lesson. I look back and think, I wish I'd learned that. I wish I'd known that when I was in my 20s, but I wonder, actually, it's just part of the journey. I needed to work it out for myself. But do you think that's true? That actually, have you found that to be true from your own experience, that by slowing down and be really purposeful, really clear on what it is that you're trying to achieve, you're achieving more as a consequence by arguably doing less in terms of physical doing?
Yes, I have. And here, and again, I'm one of those ones that I love researching and understanding, why does this work this way, and what is going on, and how does, why is my life taking off now in a way where I'm actually doing far less than what was happening before. So I started doing a lot of research in, like I said, mindfulness and yoga, and understanding the principles of kinesiology and brain gyms and what happens to the brain. And then that pointed me towards quantum physics and epigenetics. And it pointed me towards some of these scientific things that I read at a high level, but begin to understand through listening to things around Dr. Joe Dispenza and just some others who are in that research area. And at the end of the day, and I believe that, and this is just my personal belief, I believe that God is the overall being that created things, because we don't just find a watch in the woods and go, oh, I found a watch that just made itself here. There's too much intellect and order and logic without there being a creator. So I believe that the creator created the world this way, but at the lowest level of any material thing is all energy, right? It's all energy, and everything is vibrating at a certain level. And we are called human beings.
Yeah. Not human doings.
Not human doings. And so what I realized as I began to watch my life is that I was being what I was attracting. Because I had slowed down, I had stopped, I had to slow down, right? Because I had this constraint in my life, which is not a bad thing. I had this constraint that forced me to slow down. So I had to start being what I wanted to have happen in my life. And because now I'm being more mindful and I'm learning more and I'm growing myself and I'm more at peace and I'm more focused on what I'm trying to accomplish, the people, the resources, the talent, the knowledge, the insight, the whatever I needed to bring that into fruition in my life started happening. And if you think about the concepts of quantum physics, is that when we observe a experiment in quantum physics, they take a wave particle, or a wave that turns into a particle, which becomes a material activity, which means that the person who observes it changes the structure of the experiment, which means that when we decide to focus on something, we can then bring it into reality. Hence, if you go out and say, hey, I want to buy this nice little blue car, it's maybe a BMW or Corvette or something along that line, or some other fancy little car, and you purchase it, and you step off the car lot and you start driving, and guess what you start noticing? All the other little blue fancy cars like the one you're driving. You're like, they literally were not there. They literally were not there. Yeah, in your reality at the time, they were not there. But because now this is a part of what your reality and you are aware of it, they become, right? So by having to slow down, really look at my goals, look at where I'm going, think about it, plan it out in more detail, and visualize where I'm trying to go to, I started opening myself up to see the things that I needed to be brought into my life that before, because I wasn't at that state, or I wasn't being at that level, I couldn't even see it. I couldn't even see them because they were not in my vision, mentally, spiritually, any other way. But once I slowed down and began to plan out my life, be more deliberate, work on me, I can then see the resources, the things, and I began to attract into my life the people, the resources, the talent, the investments, and the things that I needed to grow my business, to grow myself, and so on. And so it's been amazing. Like when I published the book that we're talking about, A Symphony of Choices, I went to a workshop in Atlanta, right? 5 hours away. I drove there to be a part of a workshop in the VIP program. And the gentleman who was running the program, I guess because I was a part of the VIP program, he had investigated, looked at my background and so on. He goes, and so when we had this little networking thing, we met up and he said, hey, I see you have another book coming out. Come to me he goes, come to me tomorrow. I want to introduce you to my publisher. So I go to him the next day and he goes, okay, let me take you over and meet Sally. Sally's a publisher. She works with John Wiley and Son. They're the largest business book publisher in the world. I want to introduce you to, so now I'm sitting here because I went to this one thing. I had been envisioning working on this book and getting it published. Now I'm sitting on we're staying at a little round table and I'm able to tell her my story. And she goes, here's my card. Send me your manuscript and your pitch letter or your offer, letter, query letter is what it's called, for your book. And 2 months later, I'm on vacation in the Cayman Islands, and I get an email to sign my contract for my next book. It's not like how many people would have to go out and go, okay, I got to find this person. I got to hunt them down. I got to do this. I got to do that. I got to do all this other stuff. But because I put myself in a situation where I was around people and I was growing, I ended up attracting someone who was already at the top of their game that grabbed my hand and said, here's the publisher that you need. And I only had two publishers that talked to me about this book. And one was John Wiley and Sons, and they're the ones who published the book.
So I'm fascinated, Gerald, to understand what drives you.
What drives me is knowing that my life can make a difference in other people's lives. Because even as a musician, when I was a kid and I played, my neighbors would come and literally we would be playing and the whole neighborhood would kind of come over to where my parents live, and we would play pretty loud. And no one ever called the police or whatever. They just like, hey, these guys are out there playing again. And they would like stand around and listen. And so people were engaged with it. And that's kind of been the experience I've had with music. And when I did some ministry work, it wasn't about being in the ministry for me. It was about helping people. I felt called to do something. I was living in Manhattan. I was able to help people in Harlem, and I was able to help people in other places inside of Manhattan. And I felt like my life was making a difference. That lasted for about 6-7 years, and I decided I want to go back into music. Then I got into consulting. And then I realized that consulting was helping companies, but it was really helping people. Because, companies are nothing but groups of people. And I would work with a team, help them be successful, and then I would watch their individuals' lives change. As now, instead of working weekends and doing all this craziness, they would be able to, because of the solutions that we were putting in, they could get their lives back. And I could see them breathing, coming into the office like, man, this is awesome. I'm enjoying life again. We got a solution that's working. And so I felt like my calling was to continually grow myself, but to be of service. And that's why I do these podcast interviews and I write my books, is because I believe that I'm here to add value to people, to make a difference. And I want that when I'm in a room, I want people's lives to be better.
So what does success mean to you?
So for me, success is just every day being grateful and appreciative for where I have. Because at the end of the day, success is not about just having money and having things. Because, you travel to London, you go on vacation, you get a check or whatever, then you're looking for the next thing. So you end up never being satisfied. But if you can wake up every day and write down 5 things that you're grateful for, you're saying to the universe, you're saying to God, I'm grateful for what you're giving me right now. And they're going to go, okay, I'm going to give you some more. I'm going to let you enjoy some more. It's about being able to do the things you're doing, making an impact, but also enjoying the experience and enjoying life. I was doing an exercise with a coach from Tony Robbins, and we were talking about state, just being, the being part of our lives. And he says, write down 2 or 3 emotions that you want to have in your middle of your life. And so I wrote down grateful and joyful. And then I thought about it, I was like, my initials are GJL. And, and so it's like grateful, joyful, and loved. Those are so now my initials actually are the core of my emotions that I want to create for myself and for others every day, which is to be grateful for what I have, grateful to be alive, full of joy, and feeling loved by God, feeling loved by others, and sharing information where people feel like, I know the word love is not a word we use in business, but come on, let's be real. We're here 8, 9, 10 hours a day. You got to love what you do, or it's like, go do something else. So I'm really comfortable using the word love when it comes to what I get to do, because I love what I get to do now. I get to write books and take all this experience in business and in music and things I did as a kid, and I get to talk about it, and I get to integrate it and see that, people look in my office and they go like, oh, you got plaques on the wall, you got your stuff. I'm like, this is my business office. This is me. This is who I am. And so I really enjoy what I get to do every day now. I wake up and I'm not thinking about, oh my God, I got to go make the donuts.
So who or what inspires you?
I get inspired by a lot of people. I can't say there's one specific thing that I get inspired by. I get inspired by when I look at a movie or I look at sports and I see someone who suffered an injury and I see them come back from it, or I see someone who is like at the top of their game. because I know what it takes to get there, right? To get to the point where you're playing a concerto and you're playing it from memory. You're talking hours of being by yourself, just working and working and working and getting that into your neurology and getting that into your physiology so that your body remembers. Because many times when you're playing and you're playing at that level, your brain goes empty. And every note that you're playing, those emotions that you hear, the music that you hear, it's your body playing that because you've embedded it into your memory, into your mind so much. And so when I see, I can't say there's any one person or any situation that inspires me, but I think just seeing people who become experts are people who've overcome really difficult challenges and who made a decision that they were going to get better and not bitter, and that they weren't just going to go through something and come out smelling like smoke, but they were going to go through the fire, but they're going to come out and they would have grown through those challenges.
I want to bring it back to this intersection of music and productivity, which has formed much of your career at technology clearly too. But there's sort of productivity secrets that you're comfortable to share. Let's put it that way. Productivity secrets that you believe that are shared by perhaps the titans of success in both fields, or your music business, whatever. Is there a pattern there that you see across those kinds of individuals?
Sure, I would definitely say the first three things I mentioned. Practice, have a band, have a coach. But here's something else is when it comes to the actual work, like, those are kind of ethereal practice, right? We got it. But what about when you have to get the work done? I would say, I shared this on my podcast as well, but it's something called the Pomodoro technique. And the Pomodoro technique is you take an activity that you're going to work on, writing a book, doing a project, whatever you got to hands down, do something, right? Remove all the distractions, take a clock, set a timer for 25 minutes, remove the distractions, and get into flow and work. And don't stop until the 25 minutes clock goes off. Then you get up, make a mark where you are, get up, and for 5 or 10 minutes, go do something else. And then if you're still in the middle of the project, then come back and do another 25 minutes. And here's why this works, is that just like a computer, right? The hard drive probably has a couple of terabytes, right? The RAM has maybe, 32, 64 gigabytes. That's still a small amount compared to the size of the hard drive. So our conscious mind is like the RAM memory, and our non-conscious is like that hard drive. It has just tons and tons of space. But if I put too much in RAM, the computer starts to glitch, right? Then I got to reboot it. So why wait to that? Why not just, throttle what you're doing so that your conscious mind doesn't get overwhelmed and overburdened? So by working focused for 25 minutes and then taking a break, you're giving your conscious mind a chance to take a breath, to focus on something else, even if it's taking a walk around the corner, go check the mail, go outside and do some gardening, go put some laundry on, play piano, do something totally different than what you were working on. And what happens in the background is just like what it's called page memory in computer world, right? If stuff that's in RAM needs to be cached to the hard drive, it will in the background begin to cache it down on the hard drive. Well, our conscious mind works the same way. When we take that break, the brain can then while you're doing something else, it starts caching and writing what you've been learning or working on the hard drive or your subconscious. So that when you come back to it, now I'm ready to go for another 25 minutes. I'm a lot more refreshed. I've kind of rebooted the brain. I'm a lot clearer. I'm beginning to process what's going on. And in the background, just like the hard drive crunches all the numbers and everything, the subconscious is crunching all the information that you've given it. So now you do another 25 minutes, and I bet you by the next day you come back to it, you're going to be so much more integrated around what you're trying to do. And it avoids burnout. Where we burn out, it's like if we just work, I'm just going to work on this for 4 or 5 hours straight. Well, that's way past what your conscious mind can handle. Subconsciously, yes, but consciously, you can't. So you have to build in those breaks so that you have the ability to work within the capacity of your conscious mind. And we're all are dealing with that same level of capacity. And so by doing those Pomodoro techniques, it really makes a difference in how we can work.
So what next? What does the future look like for Gerald J. Leonard?
My goal is, my life goal is to at least, and if I pass this, I'll then develop another one, but to create about 50 different books. I'm working on my fourth one right now and beginning to research for my fifth. I've done a chapter in a book that's going to be coming out with Les Brown, and then to do some music, but also to have an impact on others who have gone through, some neurological things that they've dealt with, and trying to figure out, okay, and that's why I did the Productivity Smarts podcast and other things that I'm doing, like my new book series is going to be called Productivity Smarts, and just teaching people these simple principles about how to be productive where you're not burning yourself out and you're becoming more of the human being that you need to become, and you're learning to elevate your life more than just run after stuff. Because at the end of the day, no one's going to have a U-Haul going to the graveyard.
No, it's not true.
None of us are going to have
true.
that, right? And all we're going to have is that, the day we're born, we got a dash, and the day we die. And what matters most is not only just what did you do inside that dash, but what did you bring to humanity inside that dash? How many people's lives did you impact? Will people who you've impacted feel like, man, I was glad that person was born because they've made my life so much better because of who they are and what they've learned and what they've gone through and what they shared. And to me, that's what life's all about. It's because if the soul doesn't die, right, our bodies die, but then the elevation of what we do to ourselves remains with ourselves. So I want to keep working on myself because before I pass, I want to become the best self that I can become. That whatever that afterlife looks like and what God has planned for that, I want it to be the best part of that, and it can be.
I always ask of a guest, and I think partly you've shared this without necessarily me asking the specific question, but I always think hindsight is a wonderful thing. We reflect back. What advice might you give 21-year-old Gerald J. Leonard?
Focus on being more than doing. I think if I could go back and talk to myself, I would take what the practices that I'm learning now, and I would kind of create a blueprint and say, okay, son, this is what you need to do. Here's what you need to do in the morning. Here's how you need to live your life, and focus on becoming more than just doing, because as you become, life becomes so much better. Because I told one of my coaches, I said, as I'm going down this road now, because I'm living such a different life and with the mindset of being, I said, it feels like I'm on a canoe and I'm just kind of nicely coasting, going through the stream. I'm not struggling up the hill. I'm not just gliding downhill, but I'm putting in some effort, but I feel like I'm on a stream and I'm paddling, but I feel like I have a current pushing me, that I'm in the current that's taking me to where I want to go with my life. And that's a really different feeling than to feel like you're fighting upstream like a salmon trying to get to the spawning area, or you're running uphill on a mountain trying to get to the top. It's, you're not, I'm not gliding down here, because if you're going downhill, you don't have to paddle, right? You just sit there, and the gravity will take you downhill. But if you're on a stream that's going uphill, but you have a current that's pushing you and you're paddling somewhat, you're making some effort, but you feel like you have more wind at your back, the tailwind at your back, than just the efforting to get it all done.
Well, certainly the story that you and experiences that you've shared with us here on Extrology today it certainly felt like kind of the current was with us. So I really thank you for your energy, your input, and your insight. It's been wonderful. And importantly, I think, where should we be sending listeners to find out more?
We'll be giving you a link, but it's going to be to the GeraldJLeonard.com site. And I believe the /EXT but you'll have the link that you can put in the show notes, but it'll be to my website, geraldjleonard.com.
Fantastic. Gerald, it's been wonderful to share this time with you today. I've really appreciated your insight, your energy, as I say, your perspective, the lessons that you've learned. It's been invaluable. And so thank you. And I wish you a wonderful day and wonderful life for all that is ahead of it.
Exactly.
With that stream carrying you forward in the way that it is. I think that's a wonderful image on which to leave. Thank you for your time. Great to share.
Lee, thank you so much. I really appreciate the conversation.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening to today's Extrology podcast. I really appreciate your audience and ears. If you've enjoyed it, then why not hop onto iTunes and give us a review? I'd really appreciate anything that you might have to say. Any feedback always gratefully received, and look forward to hosting you next time. See you soon. Just a reminder, today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners. Visit www.progressotalent.com today for more information.